Hello, hello. Welcome to our stream. This is Office Hours. We do this every fortnight. My name is Sohan Maheshwar. Today is a very special stream because I think for the first time we have someone from the community joining us on the stream. So, Dominic, I want to extend a very special welcome to you for joining us on the stream today.
Thanks for having me, actually. I'm honored.
Very cool. And also, I think no, we've had multiple people on the stream before, but we also have Sam joining us. I think all from different parts of the world. I'm in Amsterdam. Dominic, you're in Germany. Sam, you're joining us from the West Coast in the US.
Yep, in Seattle.
Very cool, very cool. Yeah, folks in the audience, I can see Evan here as well. Evan, thanks for joining us. Yeah, so today we are going to talk about something that everyone is talking about right now, which is Model Context Protocol. If you've not heard of the term or if you're not familiar, we will discuss what it is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in the context of, pardon the pun, SpiceDB, and also talk about some of the authorization implications. There's some fun that we're going to have today because both Dominic and Sam sort of have demos and they've looked at it very differently and have looked at it from very different points of view as well. So you'll get to hear a little bit of that too. Dominic, you know what? Let's jump straight into it and let's start talking about Model Context Protocol. You work in security. You work as a consultant, so you know you're always up with like the latest technology, right? So why is this a big deal?
Okay, why MCP and AI is a big deal. I think much is talked about that, but I think for me, the outstanding thing is really the natural language processing interface. Because from my experience, for example, a few years ago, I remember building an Alexa skill. And I spent weeks bringing it into production and creating invariants and variants of speech recognition patterns to get the right intent.
Mhm.
But it failed. It failed completely, to be honest, because
At this
there's
point,
just so
Dominic,
much
I
variance.
should tell you though, I worked in the Alexa team for like 3 years, trying to get people to build
Oops.
skills. So please tell me more. No, but I totally get
No,
it. Yes, yes, go ahead.
but you know what I mean. You
Yeah,
have
yeah, absolutely.
to create this array of invariants,
Yeah.
and it always fails because speech is just so huge. And now with AI, with these LLMs, we suddenly have a great UX. So basically, everyone can very easily just type normal language in the actual language they want, using the actual language they want, and you get an answer. If it's good or bad, other thing, but it does something. And this opens up, I think, all kinds of possible innovation, which was not possible before.
Mhm.
So from a security perspective, that's another thing, but let's not talk too much about that, or perhaps later.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we'll get into that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's actually the whole reason I wrote this article you've read and from which you've invited me
Mhm.
was because I wanted a tool to show not tech-savvy customers basically the power of access management systems beyond RBAC, beyond the usual. Yeah,
Mhm.
we have an OAuth server, we have tokens, we have entitlements and the token stuff. And this is a problem when you're on the road, when you're talking to customers, because it's a status quo, and everyone's mental model is just, hey, we use roles.
Yeah.
Okay. And everyone has the same problems, actually. Like, okay, now we have documents and we want fine-grained authorization, and we cannot build 10,000 rows into a JOT token because there's a header capacity limit, and it's a mess to actually manage this stuff. So I
Yeah.
think I talk to the right people when I say this, because
Yeah, no,
yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I'm shouting myself out though, but we just uploaded a video about talking about not using JOTs for authorization for this purpose, right?
Oh,
It's on
cool.
our YouTube channel if anyone's watching. Sam, also, you've been in this space for a while. Do you concur with what Dominic's saying about, people just having this idea of like a role-based access control and, like just seeing things in that perspective?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that it's it's almost human to kind of think of things from your individual perspective. And so you can imagine yourself being an admin of something or only having read access to something. But when you think of it from an organization's perspective, there may be millions of documents. So you can't have a reader only of document 1 and document 3 and kind of the JOT explosion that Dominik was referring to. It's more of an organizational problem than a human problem. And I think that's where more sophisticated fine-grained access control is relevant. And that's why organizations are really looking for solutions. But as humans, we always kind of are maybe stuck a little bit thinking it from a real world kind of approach where, you might just have a role, like a title badge or something.
Yeah. So we have this great tool at our disposal of generative AI. And now everyone's talking about model context protocol, Dominik. So maybe we'll talk about what it is and why is everyone actually talking about it?
Sure. If you want, I can give a very high-level overview. Let me or can you put the screen on?
Yes,
I have
I will
no
do
idea,
that.
actually. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, great. You see the screen now? So yeah, in essence, you can think of the model context protocol like a USB, but for AI, so to say. As you can see in this picture here, this is showing a local MCP. So you have a client. First of all, you have a host, which is basically your computer that runs a client. In this client lives the LLM, basically. And now you have an open standard to call the tools you need to achieve something. And then you have the MCP server offering those tools, those resources, all of this stuff. And the MCP server itself is connected to the backend systems, be it the file system, the database, the API, all of that stuff. And this is actually, I think, why it really gained so much traction lately is because all of this is not new. We had APIs back then, which are basically the same principle. It's an abstraction around backend systems to make them usable. But I think the difference, or I think I read it somewhere, is kind of when you're using APIs, it's like giving someone step-by-step instructions. Here you're giving someone a map, and this someone is your LLM, and tell the LLM, just figure it out for me. So this makes it very appealing. Yeah, so this is really the highest level overview I can give around MCP. It's very simplified for sure, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, I think for me to add, if I'm not mistaken, Anthropic defined the specs around MCP. So one of I think just having like a large player in the generative AI / LLM space define, like the specs or specifications around something gives it some credibility as, like a standard that people can, operate on.
Correct. Just after I wrote this article, actually, Google and a consortium of other companies came out with the agent-to-agent protocol, which is complementary to MCP, and it feels a bit like they want to add enterprise readiness to all of this stuff, especially for remote MCPs.
Yeah.
But all of this is very, very early stage. So yeah.
Nice. And again, at a very high level, Dominik, before we jump into some of the implementation, what do you think are some implications for the existence of MCPs, right? So say it becomes famous, what changes in our ecosystem?
Good question. What will change is first of all, as I said, due to this UX, every ordinary person could just do things like, I don't know, I don't have a good example right now, but it's very easy to do things. You needed sophisticated programs back then, and you needed some knowledge about that. So I think that will change. So that it's actually, there's more open access to these capabilities through MCP and A2A. And that's a huge thing in itself, I'd say. Sam?
If I could add one thing, from an organization's perspective, that just means that having an official MCP server for your product or your resources or whatever becomes table stakes. You have to have an official MCP server so that it's authoritative, it's trusted. And then further, that means you as an organization have to build it in such a way that you are exposing the right resources, of course, with the right permissions, and you have to make it available because everyone's going to be accessing your resource, maybe not even through your product anymore. Maybe it's that most of your access might be coming through LLMs.
Yeah. I think it shifts the paradigm, right? It shifts the paradigm as to how people will consume a service that's offered by someone, and it opens up a whole bunch of other questions as well. For folks watching, just for context, Dominik authored this wonderful article, which I will link, but we're just going through it and we're talking about SpiceDB and MCP. We're going to spend most of today looking at a couple of demos, so we're going to jump straight in. Sam, for the folks in the audience who might not be familiar with what SpiceDB is, can you give us the elevator pitch, basically?
Sure. Yeah, SpiceDB is a open source project that Offset created and is now being kind of stewards for. There's a growing community there, but it's an open source project where anyone can build authorization services, permission systems. So it's an authorization service where you build your permission system for your applications. And so it was based off of a research paper by Google that was published in 2019 called the Zanzibar paper. The paper describes how Google built the system to support different access models for their various suite of products. So we took that and kind of ran with it, added some things on top of what was mentioned in the paper. And and so now today people use it to model and implement and actually drive the access controls to their products.
Yeah, that was well said, Sam. Like perfect elevator pitch, like 30 seconds. So yeah, well done. Nice. I think it was a couple of streams ago where I was put on the spot to do the elevator pitch. I found it hard, but you had it packed down. So well done. Cool. So you know what? I think everyone wants to watch some code and some demos and stuff. So we can get into it, right? Dominik, you had this idea. I know you're super active on our Discord. I think earlier you've done talks about like RBAC, RBAC, SpiceDB and stuff. Take it away. Like,
I'd say just let me add a few more sentences around the context here and the scenario I spun up, and then let's just jump right into Claude Desktop, which I'll use as MCP client, but you can. So this is not in any form advertisement. It's just one of the possible MCP clients based on that, implementing that standard. So the scenario I wanted to have is basically kind of you're a company and you have a document management system and you want to give people access to specific documents only, and you want to have a few sorry, my English. You want to not that important. You want to have permissions trickle down from folders to documents and stuff like that.
Right.
So, but before that, you want to have an access management system that's not only capable to answer yes/no questions, but also some, let's say, visibility related questions like who has access to what documents currently, or even much broader, give me the whole overview about all of my company, who has access to what thing. You want to answer those questions. And this is really where SpiceDB shines, and which is very hard for people to grasp if they haven't seen it in action and they couldn't play around with it. So that was basically my idea. Then give them a natural language interface to just add that. There's a term for that in these NIST documents. It's written in the article. It's called before the fact audit. So basically, before you are actually enforcing the policy or the access decision, you want to know what would happen or what who has access to what. So that was basically the idea, and building up on that idea, I've built the MCP, and now I'm searching my Claude window. So give me a moment. Oh,
Yeah,
it
you
just
might have to share
switched.
your screen. Yeah.
Right. Sorry, it just switched to dark mode, so I couldn't find it. But here we are.
We're team dark mode over here. I see Sam also has dark mode on his
Right.
Claude. So yeah.
So before jumping into the Claude, into the code, I just want to show people what was very easily possible. So the whole thing I've built, it's a prototype, and I've 4 to 8 hours of work, I would say. I've worked on it. Yeah. So basically, I'll ask it a very broad question first. Tell me something about my company's authorization model. And let's see what it does here. So here we see it calls the first tool, it's get schema, which basically returns the whole definitions and yeah, the whole SpiceDB schema here. And what's wrong?
I'm feeling a little left out because I don't use Claude. I'm just little old school Copilot, ChatGPT. But both Sam and Dominik have been recommending Claude Desktop and Claude Code. So something I'm going to try out for sure.
This is for sure happening because we are on stream right now. That never happened before. Let me just check something. Okay, SpiceDB is still up. It shouldn't take so much time.
Yeah.
But I have some prompts here.
This has happened to me in every demo ever, Dominik. It's the curse of the demo.
Yeah. So then let's jump back here. So I asked it when it worked. I want to know who in my company has what permission to access what and why. Please visualize it as graph and as a table. And here you can see the calls. And usually you get the schema, the SpiceDB schema here back, and it checks what relationships are actually inside the schema, like what projects are there, you can see here. And then it basically created me this visualization here. It's a bit small perhaps, but you can see, okay.
That's pretty cool.
Okay, cool. I have 2 projects, small project and big project. The CTO is basically the admin of big project with 2 teams and a few folders and files inside that. And same goes for the small project. It has a small project lead, 1 folder structure and 3 documents under it. And it also created me this table view, where I basically can see what user has access to what. And this alone is very interesting for some companies, to be absolutely honest. And
why? Sorry, if I'm jumping in, Dominik, but why would that? Sure. You know, like why would this sort of thing be of interest to a company?
Because more often than not, authorization is built in the application. There are actually, so when I started looking into all of this stuff, it was like, okay, there were very different answers to the question, how much authorization, I have it here basically. It's German, but I'll translate it, sorry. So where's the problem? This slide is called. And some people said, yeah, authorization is just super easy. Some people said we worked over a year to build our own authorizing service now because we had that special requirement. Some people said, yeah, changes for identity and access management took over 20% of our time. And some said we have a business problem basically with our role concept or our access concept. So more often than not, you see authorization built into applications, which is totally fine from the application's perspective. But if you're a company with a product or services portfolio and you need a single pane of glass, so to say, you have a problem because how do I get the data into this one graph, into this one how do I get this overview basically?
We have a question from Evan who asks, how was the permission table computed?
The Claude permission table, this one here or this one?
Yeah, this one. I assume.
Okay, I actually have no idea because the AI
We were
did
just
that
about
for
to
me.
get to that. Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think, I mean, I'm guessing because this is your implementation, but underneath the covers, it calls lookup resources.
Oh, yeah, sure. Computed. Yeah. It will call lookup resources. It will call lookup subjects. But I think this was an old one where I had problems because it used read relationships everywhere. But because it knew the schema, it also actually added the derived, that was the word I've missed earlier, the derived permissions. Because usually you shouldn't overuse read relationships because it only computes direct permissions.
I think that's the, while it has access to, well, we didn't cover it, but tools, and we've kind of exposed some SpiceDB APIs as tools. How it uses those things is the black box of the LLM.
Correct.
We don't know whether it used, lookup subjects and did it from resources backwards or from, users and lookup subject or lookup resources and did from, the other direction. That part, who knows? But it used some combination of those things.
Correct. So actually, I've tried a false negative test. So I added the MCP server without read relationships, and then it started making things up because it desperately wanted to answer me with some things. I have it right here. So I asked the same question. You can see it here, and it tried to get schema. It got the scheme. That's nice. And then it tried to just call lookup subjects, lookup resources with some stuff like resource ID marketing, whatever. And it even created me this beautiful visualization.
Holy wow.
Nice,
What?
I would perhaps say. And there are some made of people, made of roles, made of projects inside there. But it tried to answer at least. But if you don't give it the right capabilities, and that was one learning, by the way, descriptions are heck important, then it makes things up because it still wants to be of help. Yeah.
I guess one bit of background around MCP, just for, I hate using the word context when we're talking about LLM, but so at the core, MCP kind of gives you three things you can use as abstractions for your specific data and kind of interactions that that you have in your product or your data source. So they have resources, which are the things. They have tools, which are the actions you can do on those things, and they have prompts, which are kind of guided, I guess, like workflows that you can use that incorporate the things and the actions. And so, yeah, the descriptions that Dominik was mentioning is that resources are interesting because they use some sort of URI pattern to kind of identify the resources. That's pretty familiar if you've been on the web and you've built APIs before. Tools, while the implementation can map to some sort of API or some other action that you have, they're described with words like English or whatever language. And so that's what Dominik's mentioning, is that the way an LLM decides what tools to use to kind of fulfill a response to a prompt is it just knows about your description of what the tool does and what it takes as input, and it just interprets it. So this is the part as developers sometimes where you feel uneasy because it's a natural language description of what should be a concrete API, but it's just words. And an extension of that is the prompt, which is kind of more words to describe a complex workflow potentially. And an LLM decides whether or not to use that prompt or a tool just based off its interpretation of your description. And so then,
correct.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that in the article as well, Dominik, that with things like security authorization, you need it to be deterministic, and some of maybe the LLM isn't, but it's that's the I know, right? Like I know if that's the chasm or what you want to call it, but yeah.
Yeah. So coming from a security background, there are many great tools that are working in a deterministic way to achieve what you want. And I'm really not sure you want to have LLMs there. So at least if you have something, but if you have nothing, and you don't have the resources, which is in reality most of the time what you see. It's really, security doesn't make money until it hits you, and then you lose a lot of money. That's basically the thing. So maybe it's good to at least try it out and see how it goes. But you still, as for AI, need someone who knows what they are doing, or if the MCP or the AI is hallucinating, making something up. So yeah. Actually, it works again. I had to restart code. I'm so sorry.
No, all good.
So yeah,
and
now,
folks in the audience, feel free to ask questions if you have any questions
Totally.
about what's happening on screen or about MCP, authorization, SpiceDB. Feel free. No question is not allowed, so go for it.
Okay, I'll wait for questions, and until then, let me just throw in this question here: who can access search one? This is a document, but I intentionally leave it out because, let's see, this is what I mean with map instead of a step-by-step description. So I let the LLM figure it out, giving it a map. This is what I want to do. It's basically my declarative thing. I want this result. So it, first of all, wants to get an overview. So it calls get schema. And here, now we get it back. And it tries to call read relationships. And here I had many problems, actually, because it always just called read relationships all the time, and not this one, lookup subjects. But I also allow lookup subjects here right now. And I also, so it's indeterministic. And this is really a paradigm shift, to be honest. And I don't know for better or for worse, because so it could have been that it now assumed that the search one was actually a folder, and then it would have needed to call read relationships 3 times because it checked projects, folders, and then it went to documents and actually saw, hey, okay, search one is a document. But it figured it out here at the first try. And now we see here, okay, so these are all of the permissions, all of the users with permissions on the document search one. So these are basically the questions you can very easily answer, not with this LLM, but with the underlying SpiceDB. And these are of value, especially in larger companies.
Yeah, I think so. And you mentioned this earlier, Dominik, which is you're giving people not familiar with such topics like a natural way of interacting with it. So suddenly not people see the value, but you also get access to, data like this that,
right.
Yeah. So it brings in that value as well. Very cool.
And you can also ask, I don't know, what documents can our CTO access, for example? And this at the meta level is perhaps a kind of dangerous prompt, because not everyone using this should know that, but let's talk about that perhaps later. But you could do it, and it checks here. Okay, our CTO can access basically everything I added there, I think. There we are. We got an answer.
Nice. Evan asks a pertinent question, which I think we briefly talked about as well, Dominik, earlier on our call, which is, would it be possible to use SpiceDB as a deterministic authorization filter for MCP tools and MCP resources?
I can jump in on this one.
Yeah, go.
Because this is kind of where I was thinking when I was doing a parallel kind of exploration from Dominik, which is, I think that there's a few things. The answer is yes. Having an authorization tool kind of in the implementation of your specific MCP server definitely allows for kind of adding kind of access control to the results that are being exposed eventually to the LLM. And this is where something that we wanted to touch on later in our conversation here today, which is some of these tools like SpiceDB make that possible. But there are some things in the spec that are so the MCP spec that are so ambiguous that it's kind of left to best effort. And so what that leads to is that if you are kind of in the marketplace looking for MCP servers, you have to inherently trust the server to do the right thing. And so that's where there needs to be more definition and more work from the spec itself, as well as the client implementations, the MCP client implementations, to have a standardized way of enforcing and building trust with the servers. But yeah, maybe I'll touch on a little bit more, but I approached a similar thing with the MCP server implementation that I made, where I was looking for ways to kind of, add a little bit more determinism around what information gets exposed and doesn't get exposed.
Nice. Yeah, I hope that answered your question, Evan. Dominik, go ahead. I'm just going to post the link to your repository. Sure. Dominik, your repository. So I just posted the link where the code for all of this is. It's written in C#, which at least is not a language I'm familiar with. But again, we can use AI tools too, if you want.
That was really just by chance. You can do it with so I used the SDK, which is a higher level abstraction around the MCP protocol, and the C# SDK was just released or pre-released, so I wanted to try it out. Nice. Cool. So what I wanted to add to Sam is, and to Evan's question is, I think it definitely can help, but to a point. So if you want to evaluate prompts using SpiceDB, that wouldn't work very well, or every deterministic policy engine, because you would run into the same problems you had with the Alexa example I gave earlier, so on, because the variety is just so huge that you cannot build a rule for every variation of the sentence. Who can I access? Unless you're adding very coarse-grained policies like every sentence with CTO is denied by default and needs human intervention. But there are also developments in that direction. So yeah. But apart from that, when the client has the parameters, you can check the parameters. When the server runs or wants to call some backend systems, you can check if that's actually allowed, either for the server, which has its own identity, or for the user. Or you could even, before the actual tool call, check, okay, has Sam, just for example, access to any documents? No? Okay, don't make the tool call at all. Yeah.
There's a suite of security tools that are becoming more common, which are using LLMs to interpret prompts and then placing kind of guardrails around basically prompt analysis. But then there's also kind of this, I've read it multiple places now, but you can't solve AI security with more AI. Correct. So there's two camps to that, where, if you're using an LLM to interpret another LLM, LLMs all the way down, and it will never kind of feel right to kind of, I think, like a subset of developers.
At least not deterministically. We are. No, it's really, I think Presidio is one of these tools which checks for PII inside prompts and redacts them. So it's a nice thing to have, but it will not catch everything. And that's by design. It will never go to 100%. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk 6 months from now and revisit that claim.
Yeah,
I don't know where this all is heading. It's an amazing pace, by the way. So
I don't think anyone can predict where it's going in 6 months, but yeah.
Correct. So I've shown some queries here. Maybe it's interesting to look at the code a little bit to just see what I mean when I say prompt descriptions are important. So let me just share my writer here. Yeah. Here we are.
There you go. Yep, you're live. If you can increase the font size a little bit, Tom.
Sure. One moment.
Just a little bit. Yeah.
Oh, can I? Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Give me a moment. Let's remove that one. That's not important. So building this was kind of trivial from an actual MCP perspective. If I remove here the non-project files, you see it's basically, I have a program CS where the most part is actually adding some stuff to add the SpiceDB SDK clients the right way without having to set up TLS. And this is my one class, which should be more than one for sure, but it's called SpiceDB Tools, and it's around 400 lines of code because I added everything in this one class. Yeah, and here you see some descriptions, and I want to jump to one especially, which is the read relationships description I talked about earlier. And here you see I tried to tell the LLM in the client to not use this or overuse this. I told it each time you want to use this, you want to actually use lookup subjects or lookup resources before, because whatever. And this didn't work very well. So I created another branch, which I've just forgot. So I don't use C# very often anymore. Let me just have a short look here how I named this branch.
Yeah, no problem.
Come on. Sorry, this is because I'm sharing it. So here we are. And so I needed an even better description, and I've read something around prompt engineering and stuff like that. So this was basically just written down like, okay, yeah, do it. And then I put a little more thought into the description, and I saw, okay, important tags are better. You must use, like if you're writing an RFC, is better than you may want. Okay. And this really helped.
Sorry, Dominik, question. But sure. Is this like a sort of like a recommendation or defined in the spec for an MCP? Or is it just part of like the LLM accepting a tag that is important?
I'd say it's a general recommendation. Okay. In the end, it's an LLM, and you need to know how to write your prompts. So I have a bit of experience in that area, but there are many people having much more experience there. And yeah. And I also had, for example, the problem that it just answered with the types. So it's user, user, user instead of user Sam, user so and. So I also added an answer example into the description so it knows, okay, the values are at the right side of the column.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and the code is basically, if you're using the SDK, it's, I would even say, kind of trivial. You add this MCP server tool attribute, it's called in C#. You're implementing the actual method. You also add descriptions to the parameters. And I'm not sure, having seen Sam's MCP right now, which you can show later on perhaps, because he added here also optional, I added required. I don't know if that's correct. Maybe my fault. Yeah, you implement the actual call, and in the end, you will. Sorry, this is because the screen recording scrolling is a bit hard. Come on, here we are. So, and here you're adding relationships for whatever, and I have this relationships array here, and I'll just join it because I'm using std.io transport. So this is not a remote MCP server where you would use server-side events. Here we are using std.io server transport on an empty application builder, because else the .NET framework itself would add some stuff to the console, which we wouldn't want. And this is actually the magic part here. So when the program gets assembled, the SDK checks, okay, there are these attributes, and it creates the whole MCP underlying spec compliant JSON basically out of that. And I think, Sam, you worked a little bit more low level, right? So do you want to show yours a bit?
Sure. Cool. And also for background, since you mentioned it, Dominik, MCP servers, the spec itself, the interaction, the wire protocol is JSON RPC, but the actual communication can happen over, just std.io on your local machine, or over the internet, or over a network. That's all they say. And so what's ended up happening in terms of how it's used in the real world today is that it's almost an expectation that you run an MCP server local to your MCP client on the same machine. And as a result, kind of the idea of access controls on data are kind of just hand waved over because you're running the thing by yourself on your own machine. And so things like the file system MCP server, for example, just kind of has access to like an entire directory that you pointed at. And it's kind of left to you to figure out to configure the server so that you don't have it look at the wrong files. There's technically support for remote MCP servers where you'd probably want, well, the expectation is that multiple users will be connecting to a single MCP server instance. And that's where it becomes kind of multi-tenant, right? And you have to have permissions and things like that. But that's a rarity I found. Almost every MCP server is essentially expected to run local to your client.
Yeah, at least currently. So I'm looking at the respective GitHub repositories currently, and they just added an RFC, for example, for the revised authorization spec for MCP, where they are defining a whole lot of things that are currently missing. So if you read my article, I'd suggest this outdated information because that was, I think, 1.5 weeks ago, which is basically half a year in AI time. So yeah.
Sam, so I'm putting your screen on the stream, but so the two different things that you did. One was you looked at MCP and SpiceDB slightly differently, but you also coded all of this a little differently from Dominik, right? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. I'll just kind of try to highlight the differences because I realized once I read Dominik's article, we had been kind of working on a similar thing in parallel, just from different perspectives. And so a few of the differences are that I looked at building an MCP server for SpiceDB kind of to expose the foundational kind of data and actions that you would use SpiceDB for. And then with the hopes that you could build maybe some business workflows or kind of developer workflows on top of kind of these foundational tools and concepts. And so my approach was to just, map things that are SpiceDB to things that I read in the MCP spec and kind of match the spirit of the two. And so I think that, some of the behavior that I saw in mine is different from Dominik's just because we approached it from kind of philosophically different approaches. And the other thing was that I also kind of use it as an excuse to try vibe coding.
Nice.
Being more seasoned as a developer, the idea of vibe coding just hasn't sat well with me. But I figured, you could only learn if you try, and so I tried.
It's what the cool kids are doing.
Yeah, and so almost as like a thought experiment, and I don't know, maybe some performance art, I decided to kind of adhere to a few principles, which was I was not going to actually edit the code myself. It would be all done through prompts and whatnot, and just to see like what interaction with vibe coding kind of what results you get based off of what you do and how you interact with it. And then I use Claude and Claude Code just because that's what I've been using and most familiar with. And then I kind of was able to get something running very quickly. So I think, to summarize, my experience vibe coding this thing was mixed. There's some great things, some very insightful things, some concerning things, but I can definitely see why people do it. And then the resulting MCP implementation actually has a lot of potential because I was able to build kind of these next layer kind of interactions because of the SpiceDB fundamentals that were available. So I'll do kind of similar to what Dominik did. I'll just kind of use some example prompts that I tried. Let's see, where are they? So first thing that I was looking at, I should give some background. So this is Claude Code, or Claude Desktop. It is an MCP client itself. And so some of the things that it does is unique to Claude Desktop. So those little prompt windows, when I asked you, do I have permission to run this tool? That's a Claude Desktop thing, not an MCP thing. So just to clarify, it's just coincidence that both Dominik and I use Claude.
Correct.
And so I have a SpiceDB instance running locally. that is preloaded with this schema. And anyone can look at the schema because it's actually the example that's on the SpiceDB playground. If you go to play.authid.com, you click this example schema dropdown. It's the user-defined roles schema. And this schema is interesting. It's because it's a very common use for SpiceDB. And so you can imagine an API, or sorry, an application that has the ability to, you might have used this where you go into a web app, there's like an admin menu, and you can say, add an admin role, add a developer role, add a viewer only role. And behind the scenes, these are being kind of written into SpiceDB, and you can kind of have user-defined roles for different resources. So each application kind of figure out which roles make sense for itself, and you can kind of map that into SpiceDB. So that's what's loaded locally for me. So the first use case I want to cover is kind of like a context-aware developer assistant. So I already know SpiceDB. I've kind of built up a schema myself. Can I use an LLM to kind of help me interact with it to kind of maybe either speed things up for me, make it more efficient, or actually answer some questions and interact with SpiceDB in a way that I wouldn't be able to figure out myself. So the first prompt that I'll throw in here, I should say the other thing I'll show off is in the desktop MCP client, if you have a server that's connected to it, it'll show you all the tools that are available. So
I'm very happy you are showing all the things I forgot earlier. But
teamwork. Yeah. And so these are the tools, and these are actually the descriptions that Dominik mentioned. They're exposed kind of in the client itself. And these roughly map to SpiceDB APIs. And then one thing I have in my server are the prompts, which are kind of like the composed guided workflows using the resources and tools. And so you can see, when you choose integration, these are all the ones listed under SpiceDB. If I had more MCP servers connected, they would all be listed under here. But these are kind of higher level things like explain a permissions check or look up resources for a subject. So it's using the API under the covers, but there's additional prompting kind of baked in there. And it'll kind of guide you through something. And so just to kind of show off, it also kind of gives you this like input thing that you can kind of, again, it's a guided workflow. But to start, so the first use case I was thinking was, what if I had like a smart developer assistant? So the prompt here is, can you set up a test scenario for me where I want to try, like, I know I need this kind of like scenario built up so I can write my unit test or something. So I just tell it kind of roughly what I need to have as an end result. And who knows what it's going to do, but in the responses I've seen, so it's reading the schema first. Now it's going to read relationships and better understand the state. Uh-oh. That was an error, but now it's trying to do other things.
To better understand the state. Okay,
So it's going to write a relationship. So this is
the thing I intentionally left out, actually. Yeah.
So if anyone looks at the repo for this later, I have a write relationships to be able to support the scenario. I did not intentionally, I did not include a write schema because that could really break things.
Yeah. Here's the link, folks, for the GitHub repo. It's on Sam's GitHub profile. So yeah, you can just feel free to play around with it. It's in TypeScript, correct?
So this is now, it's kind of did its research and now it's kind of doing the various steps. So this is why this was interesting for me, is that just based off of the schema, it knows that there's levels of indirection in the schema. You have to create a role, and then you have to write a relationship for that role, and then between the role and the project itself. And it's actually kind of doing that step by step. It's doing a lot more than that as well. But and then now it's verifying that what it did actually worked. So then at the end of this, at the end of all that work, it states there's a new auditor role, which I wanted on the project. And Jared is now an auditor. So it's kind of changed the system to be able to support the test scenario that I wanted. And as a developer, I probably would have been able to do that myself, but you can almost imagine a world in a CI system where instead of writing kind of scaffolding for your test environment, you just write in English or German or whatever language, set up this scenario. And this is schema aware, SpiceDB schema aware, and it just sets up the data in that exact state. That would be an incredibly expensive CI system right now, but it would be really, really neat developer UX.
I would be very interested what my system will do with that prompt. So if it at least gives me the right relationship tuples and stuff.
Yeah.
We might try that out later.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But very cool.
What
very
could
cool
go
use
wrong?
case.
Yeah.
Right.
What we noticed is, like I said, one thing I tried to do with my implementation is really try to understand this. Like, it was a learning exercise for me. So like understand what the spirit of the spec was trying to get at. And so I try to adhere to their best practices as close as possible. So the MCP server that I wrote, or I had oversight over, I didn't write any of it. It exposes relationships as resources and objects in the schema as resources, like MCP resources. And I almost want to think that it helps it reason better about how to use these things because they're resources and not text. And yeah, so that's one observation we learned just in the conversations that Dominik and I had. And then quickly, I wanted to show, so another kind of like higher level kind of maybe business workflow would be, this is now similar to Dominik, where it's like, what if there was a natural language interface to complex business questions that were inherently permissions or authorization oriented? So same schema, same data, but let's say you had like a, this is like maybe like a customer success or a CX kind of workflow where it's like, oh, this project is now deprecated. Who do I need to alert or tell that they need to update something, or like, by the way, this product is now being sunsetted, like go migrate your data or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, this project's being deprecated, find all users who have access so they can be notified. So again, it's interesting with this schema because that it's not a single call to say who has access. You have to have the project, which we already know. You have to find all the roles that someone has defined for that, because again, these are user defined roles. And then you have to find all the users who have all those roles. And so what the prompt did is basically go through that step-by-step process. One thing I'll kind of point out is, maybe this is another difference between our implementations, Dominik, is that because it read schema earlier and my schema is exposed as a resource, it doesn't call get schema again because it has previous context. It remembers everything.
I think you did the right thing there. This is what resources are actually for. I just wrote it down, so implemented it like, I'm just trying this out currently.
Yeah. This is why this, like, again, new to everybody. But yeah, it successfully went through that process, like I said, and found all the individual users, gives me their roles. This person has multiple roles. So yeah, it's like someone, you can imagine someone in your organization who is dependent on the right data kind of going through your permission system to get the data you need to kind of fulfill what they're trying to do, but maybe not having to interface with it either through like a web app that you have to define for that person. What if they interacted with it just by chatting with it, right? And so these are the things that both scare me, but also there is potential. And so if we could somehow build the right security and kind of access control protocols in place, like this is why I think it's interesting despite the worries that we have.
I totally second that claim, by the way. I'd also say it's really, really interesting, but heck scary, because we essentially give AI agents, Evan called it very politely, it's the agentic workforce. We give them access to file systems, databases, services, APIs. What could possibly go wrong? Well, a whole lot. But yeah.
Also, shout out Sam for using the character names from Silicon Valley as well as Pied Piper and stuff.
I can't take credit. That was already in the sample schema that we had.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So again, folks, where is Sam's? Here it is. The repository is here, Sam. It's in TypeScript, correct?
Yeah. Oh, and then just to kind of close the loop on the whole vibe coding experience and experiment. So I, from start to finish, kind of reading the spec a bit and the documentation on the Model Context Protocol website, and following some instructions that they recommended, to opening up Claude Code on a completely empty repo. It took about 2 hours end to end to kind of get basically what you saw here. And it was $2.14 of API credits with Anthropic, and then a few kind of sessions inside of Claude Desktop to kind of fix some bugs. So maybe a little bit more than $2, but that was kind of the result. What I did was, because I knew it had to run locally, and it was more straightforward. I actually just gave it the that's why it's TypeScript, because it could use the HTTP SpiceDB API. And yeah, those are kind of like the nudges that I gave it. And then when it came to fixing bugs, I landed on, without actually changing the code yourself, the best way to do it is give it examples of output and say, here's actually the output that is expected. And I gave it line numbers, and it was able to essentially make the edits that I would have made.
Nice.
Cool.
Just running through a lot more GPUs to do it. And what else? Yeah, I think. Oh, and then because it's a small project, Claude Code was essentially be able to include the entire repo in its context. So it knew how to change. It knew about every single line in the repo. So if I told it, "Oh, go fix this thing," it knew exactly where it was. So that line number really was more of like a way to speed it up, not necessarily to kind of inform it what to do or where to do it. For a bigger project, who knows? But in this case, yeah, it was almost like it knew about every single line before it, before I went off and made edits. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
Sorry. Last thing, if you go to the repo, again, everything is written from the LM. And that includes a README. I told it to document
what?
And then kind of to Dominik's point, the descriptions are very important. Those descriptions are written by itself so I instructed it, make your descriptions useful for yourself.
Oh, wow.
What you see is what it thinks is the best way to use it. And to be honest, some of the kind of reasoning ability that you see where it gets the schema and then takes an object description and then does something, it's because I think I've tried to map it as close as possible to kind of like the abstractions that MCP wants to define. And then it kind of does its thing. But yeah, the descriptions are very important.
I have never tried vibe coding, but now I'm hyped. So maybe I'll try it out over Easter or something. Yeah.
Dominik, do you want to be live on a stream trying out vibe coding?
Oh no,
it's an offer. The offer is always there.
Okay, but nah.
Okay, so folks,
we're almost out of time. I'm a grumpy old man when I'm trying that stuff out. So
okay, even better for the stream. Honestly, even better. We'd love to see grumpy old men shout at AI agents on stream. Okay, so almost out of time, but I think we touched upon it a little bit, but I think it's important to talk about, which is the aspect of security and MCP. Dominik, I know you've been looking into this fairly deep, and you've also raised a couple of issues on GitHub. I've also looked at the spec at a very high level, and a lot of it just isn't there, right? Like Sam said, it's best effort, do this. There isn't really a strong thing. So just some thoughts on permissions and MCP and AI agents and so on. And I'll start with you, Dominik.
So on a very high level, my thoughts on that are they're trying currently, and it's a very early spec, so no rant at all, or no judgment at all. But it is a very early spec, so I'd advise my customers not to put a remote MCP in production for at least some time now. That said, it feels the same as talking to customers. Like if you only know OAuth and all of that stuff, you try to put it everywhere. And I'm curious where that goes, actually, because there are many known problems for OAuth, being it the coarse granularity, even if you use scopes for adding a bit more granularity inside. So in these agent-to-agent communication, I just see how it goes, I'd say. So it's really an open standard is a step in the right direction, but it's the first step. And I think I wrote it also in the article. It's missing the maturity of an 18-year-old whiskey. So I'll wait for that, perhaps.
Yeah, it's very much a work in progress, right? Yeah. Sam, also you've been in the space for a while, and you've also taken a look at the spec. Where do you see where it is now, and what it potentially could go into?
Yeah, I think one of the things, and this is my interpretation, but I think the way the maintainers are approaching some of these things are to kind of leave a lot of the complexity to the implementers and to the users, because that, honestly, I think that allows for broader adoption. And I think that, the spec isn't important if it's not being used. So I understand the balance that they're trying to capture. And I think my take is that while having, let's say, well, there are a lot of issues, with having something that's, let's say, shared between users. The current use today, where it's you run your own server, or maybe you run an internal version of this just for your organization, those are still valuable. And the thing that I'm looking at is, are there recommendations, or are there reference implementations that we can provide that allow you to secure it for your constrained environment? So yeah, don't run, what Dominik said, do not run a remote MCP server over the internet, period.
But I totally agree to your words too, because it is of value itself if it runs locally, and it's just early, and let's see where this goes. And there we are. Yeah.
And biased, of course, but I think that there is absolutely a place where SpiceDB can play a role in, again, the constrained environment where you have your own Teams implementation of an MCP server, and you can trust the identities that are coming through a token from OAuth, and but then you use that to correctly filter data that's coming through your backend service into the LLM. Again, well, even then the LLMs, you have to make sure they're not remote LLMs, or the ones that you're okay sending data to. But again, there's a lot of things where if you are not kind of in the AI thought space, that can be tricky, because you really don't know what's running where and all that stuff. So yeah, maybe
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
One last thing, perhaps. I think not necessarily at the spec level, but definitely on the, I'm a big co and I am building an MCP platform where I have a marketplace of MCPs. RBAC systems will definitely have their place. So it's the same as, I think the reason SpiceDB exists is because Jake had problems with access management for their Docker registry.
Yeah, queer.
MCP is another point of type of container around something. So here we are, same problems.
Yeah, well said. I think we're out of time, but yeah, super interesting discussion. And honestly, I'd love to revisit this like few months down the line, because so much would have changed. But I also think a lot of what we spoke about will be relevant then, right? So yeah, for folks watching, do follow Dominik on the socials. He writes a lot of great like blogs and tutorials and stuff as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Dominik, Sam, thank you so much for the stream. It's a lot of fun. Hope people learn something new. And yeah, we will see you in a couple of weeks where we stream every Thursday at this time. So see you then.